Her ex took everything in the divorce, but forgot the old workshop her father hid in her name. What she discovered inside wasn't just about the past. It was the key to a future she never thought she'd have. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, this story is for you. So hit that subscribe button and let's get into it. The weight of the manila envelope in my hands was nothing compared to the weight in my chest. It felt like a hollowed-out space, a cavern carved by 2 years of legal battles, sleepless nights, and the slow, grinding erosion of my own self-worth. I stood on the pavement outside the law office of Albright and Associates, the city noise a dull roar in my ears. The glass doors reflected a version of me I didn't recognize. A woman in her late 20s with shadows under her eyes that had nothing to do with the overcast sky. The final decree. That's what Ms. Albright had called it. Sounded so absolute, so biblical. A judgment handed down from on high. And in a way it was. Mark got the house, the one I'd painstakingly decorated, turning it from a sterile new build into a home. He got the savings, the investments, the art we'd collected. He even got the dog. His argument was that he was the primary earner, the one with the stable career, and I was just the wife. An accessory he was now discarding. The court had agreed. I clutched the envelope to my chest, the sharp corner digging into my palm. It was all in there, page after page of legal jargon that amounted to a single, brutal sentence. You have lost. You are nothing. You leave with what you brought, which, after 8 years of marriage, the court had decided was a 2012 sedan. A mountain of debt I hadn't even known was in my name, and 3 boxes of personal effects he'd magnanimously allowed me to retrieve under the supervision of his lawyer. I felt a cold, quiet numbness settle over me. It was the body's last defense, I think, when the pain is too much to process. You just stop feeling. The traffic light across the street changed from red to green. People flowed past me, a river of purpose and direction, while I stood anchored to the spot, a stone in the current. Where was I even supposed to go? My apartment was a sublet I couldn't afford past the end of the month. My friends had been his friends first, and they'd quietly chosen their side. I was an island, a shipwrecked sailor on an island of one. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a frantic, angry sound. I ignored it. It would be him, or his lawyer, or a creditor. They were all the same voice now, the voice of my failure. I took a breath, the city air thick with exhaust fumes and the smell of rain. I needed to move, just 1 foot in front of the other. That's all it took. I started walking, with no destination in mind, just the need to put distance between myself and that glass building where my life had been officially dismantled. The envelope felt heavier with every step. I thought about my father. He'd been gone for 3 years. A sudden heart attack that had stolen him away before he ever got to see the man his daughter had married for who he truly was. Dad had never liked Mark. He'd been polite, of course, but I'd seen it in the tightness around his eyes. The way he'd hold his tongue when Mark would make some grand, arrogant statement about his business ventures. At the time, I'd thought it was just a father's overprotectiveness. Now I saw it for what it was, clarity. He'd seen the rot under the polished surface. He'd seen the emptiness in the man I'd promised to love forever. And I had ignored him. The thought was a fresh stab of guilt in the already gaping wound of my grief. I must have walked for miles. The sky had opened up, a miserable gray drizzle soaking through my thin jacket. I found myself in a small city park, the kind of forgotten green space wedged between concrete towers. I sat on a wet bench, not caring about the cold seeping into my clothes. I finally opened the envelope. I didn't need to read the dense paragraphs. I just looked at the final summary page, the neat columns of assets and liabilities. His column was long and prosperous. Mine was a wasteland, a zero. Less than zero, actually, when you factored in the debt. I let the papers fall onto my lap, the rain starting to blur the ink. It was official. I was destitute. A dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips. It was so absurd, so complete in its devastation, that it was almost funny. He hadn't just won. He had annihilated me, erased me from the life we had built. My phone buzzed again, persistently this time. I sighed, pulling it out, ready to block another number. But the caller ID said, Albright and Associates. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but a flicker of something, maybe just the habit of obedience, made me answer. Hello. My voice was a croak.
Elena?
It's Sarah Albright. Her tone was as calm and professional as ever, a stark contrast to the storm inside me. I'm so sorry to bother you. I know today has been difficult. That's one word for it, I said, the bitterness coating my tongue. Listen, I'm calling because something just came up. It's a loose end. Frankly, in the chaos of everything, I missed it. And so did they, which is the only reason it still exists. I sat up a little straighter. They? You mean Mark's lawyers? Exactly. It's a very minor asset. On paper, it's practically worthless, which is why it flew under the radar. It's not in the city. It's a piece of property. My mind went blank. Property? I had no property. I don't understand. Everything was in the marital portfolio. Everything was liquidated or assigned to Mark. Not this, she said, and I could hear the faint sound of papers rustling. This was never marital property. It was transferred to you and you alone on your 18th birthday. A gift from your father. Martin, my breath caught in my throat. My father. It's a commercial lot with a structure on it. An old workshop, it looks like. In a town called Oakhaven. Do you know it? Oakhaven. The name was a ghost on my tongue. It was the small, sleepy town where my father had grown up. The place we'd visited a few times when I was a little girl to see a great-aunt who had long since passed. It was a place of faded memories, of peeling paint on front porches and the sweet smell of cut grass. I think so. A long time ago. Well, Ms. Albright continued, her voice holding a strange, new note of something that wasn't quite pity, but felt adjacent to it. According to the county records, you are the sole owner of Lot 7 on Ridge Road, a 5,000-square-foot workshop. The property taxes are negligible and have been paid automatically from a trust account your father set up. An account that, being in his name and predating your marriage, Mark had no claim to. He doesn't know it exists, Elena. A workshop. I tried to picture it, but all I could conjure was a vague image of a dusty, forgotten building on the edge of a town I barely remembered. Why would my dad give me a workshop? He was a machinist, a man who worked with his hands, but his passion was his job, not some side project. What is it worth? I asked, the question tasting like ash. Money was the only language I understood anymore. There was a pause. Financially? Not much. The assessment values the land at next to nothing and the structure is listed as being in a state of disrepair. Tear down, essentially. You might get a few thousand for the lot if you could find a local buyer. But Elena, she said, her voice dropping slightly, it's yours. It's the one thing that is completely, unequivocally yours. I just thought you should know. The line went dead. I sat there on the wet bench, rain dripping from my hair onto the legal papers in my lap. A workshop. A worthless, dilapidated workshop in a town I hadn't seen in 20 years. It was nothing. A joke. A cruel postscript to the epic tragedy of my divorce. But as the numbness began to recede, replaced by the first, faint tremor of something else, I clutched the phone in my hand. It was nothing, but it was mine. And in a world where I had nothing, that suddenly felt like everything. The rain was washing the ink away, turning the legal decree into a meaningless, pulpy mess. I let the papers slip from my fingers and fall into a puddle on the ground. I stood up. For the first time all day, I knew where I was going. The drive out of the city was like an act of escape. I packed the 3 boxes of my former life into the trunk of my sedan, the last material links to 8 years of shared history. A handful of books, some old photographs, a worn-out sweater I loved, a chipped mug from a college trip, the detritus of a life. I didn't look back as I merged onto the highway, the skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror until it was just a jagged line of gray against a grayer sky. The city had been my home, the backdrop to my love story, my career, my identity as Mark's wife. Now it just felt like a cage I'd finally broken out of. The farther I drove, the more the concrete and steel gave way to green and brown. The endless strip malls and housing developments bled into rolling farmland and dense patches of forest. The air itself seemed to change, losing its chemical sharpness and taking on the clean, damp scent of earth and trees. Oak Haven was 3 hours away, 3 hours of watching the white lines on the asphalt hypnotically unspool before me. I had no plan. I had a quarter tank of gas, about $80 in my bank account, and the name of a town. It was the most unprepared and the most free I had ever felt. I thought about the workshop. My father had never mentioned it. Not once. On my 18th birthday, he'd taken me out for dinner and given me a small, beautiful silver locket. That was my gift. Or so I had thought. Why would he secretly gift me a derelict building? He wasn't a man for grand, mysterious gestures. He was practical. A man who believed in straight lines and clear instructions. A machinist's mind. Everything had a purpose, a function. If he had done this, there had to be a reason. The thought was a small, steady flame in the cold emptiness of my chest. The town of Oak Haven appeared so suddenly it was almost startling. One moment I was on a winding country road flanked by trees. The next I was passing a faded wooden sign that said, "Welcome to Oak Haven, Pop 1253. The town was exactly as I remembered it, which is to say it felt like a place preserved in amber. A single main street with a row of 2-story brick buildings housing a diner, a hardware store, a post office, and a handful of other small businesses. There were no traffic lights, just stop signs where people gave each other friendly, unhurried waves to proceed. It was the polar opposite of the life I had just left. The quiet was profound, broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant hum of what sounded like a lawnmower. I pulled over to the side of the road, my city-honed nerves jangling in the silence. Ridge Road. That's what Ms. Albright had said. I plugged it into my phone's GPS, and a single, dotted line appeared, leading to the edge of town. Following the directions, I turned off the main street and onto a narrower, paved road that quickly devolved into packed gravel. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by overgrown fields and thickets of woods. The road climbed a gentle hill and then I saw it. The GPS announced, "You have arrived," with a cheerful indifference that was almost comical. The workshop stood alone on a wide, flat plot of land, set back from the road. Disrepair was a generous word. The building was a long, low structure made of corrugated metal and wood, and it looked like it was slowly losing a battle with gravity. The metal walls were streaked with rust, the wooden sections gray and weathered. Part of the roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and the windows were either boarded up or broken. A large, sliding garage door on the front was padlocked, the metal groaning in the wind. It looked abandoned, forgotten. It looked like how I felt. I parked my car on the gravel shoulder and got out. The air was cool and crisp. I walked slowly up the overgrown path to the front of the building, my shoes crunching on weeds and loose stones. There was a smaller, man-sized door next to the big garage door. It had a heavy, old-fashioned lock, but the wood around it was so soft and rotten that I wondered if I could just push it in. I tried the handle. Locked, of course. I peered through a grimy, cracked pane of glass in one of the few windows that wasn't boarded over. It was too dark to see much, just shapes and shadows, the hulking silhouettes of what looked like workbenches and machinery draped in tarps. The air smelled of damp earth, rust, and something else. A faint, lingering scent of oil and sawdust. The smell of my father. I remembered coming home from school and he'd be in the garage, cleaning a part or sharpening a tool, and he'd have that same scent clinging to his clothes. A wave of grief, so sharp and sudden it buckled my knees, washed over me. I leaned my forehead against the cool, rough wood of the door, and for the first time since leaving the lawyer's office, I cried. Not for the house or the money or even for the dog. I cried for him, for the father I missed with an ache that was a physical presence in my body. After a few minutes, the wave passed, leaving me exhausted but strangely lighter. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and took a step back, looking at the building with new eyes. This wasn't just a derelict structure. This was the last thing my father had given me. It was a message, a puzzle, something. And I was going to get inside. I walked around the perimeter, testing the boarded-up windows, looking for any point of weakness. Everything was sealed tight. It was almost as if it had been fortified, meant to keep people out, or perhaps to keep something in. Finally, at the back of the building, half hidden by a tangle of thorny bushes, I found a small, low window. The wood of the frame was almost completely rotted away. I pulled at it, and a large chunk came away in my hand, crumbling into damp mulch. The opening was small, but it might be just big enough. I cleared away the thorns as best I could, my hands getting scratched and scraped in the process. Then, taking a deep breath, I hoisted myself up and squeezed through the opening, tumbling ungracefully onto the dusty concrete floor inside. I landed in a heap, coughing as a cloud of dust billowed up around me. For a moment, I just lay there on the cold floor, the fall having knocked the wind out of me. The air inside was thick and stale, heavy with the scent of decay and time. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, the interior of the workshop slowly revealed itself. It was vast, much bigger than it had looked from the outside. The only light came from the hole I just crawled through and a few thin shafts of sunlight piercing through gaps in the roof, illuminating swirling motes of dust like tiny, dancing spirits. The space was filled with the ghosts of work. Long, heavy workbenches lined the walls, covered in a thick shroud of dust but still bearing the scars and stains of past projects. Silent, hulking machines stood draped in white canvas tarps, their shapes mysterious and monolithic in the dim light. Shelves were filled with old coffee cans of nails and screws, neatly labeled in my father's blocky handwriting. It was a cathedral of forgotten labor. I got to my feet, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of trespass. This was his space, a secret part of his life I had never known existed. I ran my hand along the surface of a workbench, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. Underneath, the wood was solid oak, scarred with countless cuts, burns, and oil stains. This bench had seen years of use. This wasn't some casual hobby space. This was a place of serious, dedicated work. I moved deeper into the cavernous room, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I pulled back the corner of one of the canvas tarps. Underneath was a metal lathe, its steel surfaces coated in a thin film of protective grease. It was old, but it looked incredibly well-maintained. I moved to the next draped form and revealed a drill press, then a milling machine, then a massive belt sander. It was a complete, professional-grade machine shop. My father had been a machinist at a large industrial plant. Why would he need a second, secret workshop of his own? It didn't make any sense. The cost of this equipment alone must have been staggering. How could he have afforded this? And why hide it? I wandered through the maze of machinery, a growing sense of awe and confusion washing over me. This place was his sanctuary. I could feel it. The way the tools were organized, the logic of the layout, the sheer scale of the operation. It all spoke of a deep, abiding passion. This was more than a hobby. This was a life's work. As I reached the far end of the workshop in the darkest corner of the building, I saw something else. Tucked beneath the longest workbench, almost completely hidden in shadow, was a large, old-fashioned footlocker. It was made of dark wood, bound with straps of rusted iron. Unlike everything else in the room, it wasn't covered in a thick, uniform layer of dust. There were smudges near the lid, faint scuff marks on the floor around it, as if it had been accessed more recently than anything else. A heavy, antique padlock secured the latch. My heart began to beat faster. This was it. This felt different. It was deliberately hidden, deliberately secured. I knelt on the cold concrete, my knees protesting. I pulled on the padlock, but it was solid. There was no giving it. I looked around for something to use as a lever, my eyes scanning the cluttered shelves. I found a long, heavy-duty crowbar, its red paint chipped and worn. It felt solid and purposeful in my hands. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the space between the lid and the body of the chest, right next to the lock's hasp. I put my weight into it. The old wood groaned in protest. The sound was obscenely loud in the silent workshop. I pushed harder, gritting my teeth, my muscles straining. There was a sharp crack, and then a splintering sound as the wood around the hasp gave way. The lock, still intact, fell to the floor with a heavy thud. For a moment, I just knelt there, breathing heavily, my adrenaline singing. Then, with trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid of the footlocker. The air that rose from the chest was different from the stale air of the workshop. It was dry and smelled faintly of paper and cedar. The contents were sparse and meticulously arranged. On top lay a thick, sealed envelope made of heavy, cream-colored paper. My name, Elena, was written on the front in my father's familiar, angular script. My breath caught. This was a direct communication, a voice from the past. Beneath the envelope there were a few other items. A set of old, leather-bound books that looked like technical manuals. A small velvet pouch. And a single, tarnished silver key on a simple leather cord. I picked up the key first. It was ornate with a complex, filigreed head. It didn't look like it belonged to any modern lock. I set it aside and reached for the velvet pouch. It was surprisingly heavy. I loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents into my palm. A cascade of gold coins spilled out. They weren't currency, not in the modern sense. They were Krugerrands, maple leafs, American eagles. Solid, heavy, 1-ounce gold coins. I counted them. There were 20. At today's prices, that was a lot of money. More money than I'd seen in one place in my entire life. Enough to start over. Enough to disappear. My mind reeled. Why? Why would he leave this here, hidden away? It was a lifeline, a parachute he had packed for me years ago. But the real treasure, I knew, was the letter. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, the seal on the back unbroken. I used my thumbnail to carefully slice it open, my heart hammering against my ribs. Inside were several pages, filled with that same steady handwriting. I unfolded them, took a deep breath, and began to read. "My dearest Elena," it began. "If you are reading this, then two things have happened. The first is that I am gone. For that, my girl, I am more sorry than I can ever say. The thought of leaving you alone in this world is the only fear I have ever known. The second is that you have found your way here, to this place. I hope that you found it in a time of peace, that your life is full and happy, and that this is all just a curious footnote from your eccentric old man. But I am a machinist and a realist. I believe in planning for stress points and system failures. And I fear, my love, that your marriage to Mark is a system designed for catastrophic failure." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to stop reading, my eyes blurring with tears. He had known. All this time he had known. I took a shaky breath and forced myself to continue. "I saw it the first time I met him," the letter went on. "Not because I am a genius, but because I have seen his type before. The world is full of them. Men who see people not as souls but as assets. Men who glitter on the surface but are hollow inside. He doesn't love you, Elena. He possesses you. And one day, when you are no longer a valuable asset to him, he will liquidate you. He will try to take everything, not because he needs it, but because he cannot stand for you to have it. He needs to win, and his victory is only complete if you are left with nothing. I tried to warn you in my own clumsy way, but you were in love. And love is a force that doesn't listen to cautious old men. To push harder would have been to risk losing you, and that was a risk I could not take. So, I did the only thing a machinist knows how to do. I built a failsafe. I looked around the dusty, silent workshop, at the hulking, shrouded machines. This place. This was the failsafe. This workshop, he wrote, was my secret, my passion. The company I worked for was my job, but this was my art. And I used it to create a lifeboat for you. The gold coins are your immediate escape. They are untraceable, liquid. It is enough for you to get a new apartment, a new car, to build a new foundation far away from him and his influence. It is enough to be free. Take it and go. Disappear. Do not feel guilty. Do not look back. It is the first gift. I sank back on my heels, the pages trembling in my hand. The generosity of it, the foresight, was overwhelming. He had seen the storm coming years before it ever reached my shores and had built me a harbor. The gold in my hand felt impossibly heavy, a tangible manifestation of his love and his worry. I could just walk out of here, take the coins, get in my car, and drive until Oakhaven was just another memory. I could start a new life in a new city where no one knew my name, where the ghost of my marriage couldn't find me. It was a tempting thought, the clean break, the easy way out. But the letter wasn't finished. There was more. I stayed there on the cold concrete floor for what felt like an hour, the letter resting in my lap. The initial shock gave way to a tidal wave of emotions. Grief, sharp and raw, for the father who had loved me so fiercely and so quietly. Rage, hot and blinding, at Mark for being exactly the man my father knew he was. And a deep, gut-wrenching shame for my own blindness. I had defended Mark to my father. I had dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned jealousy. I had chosen my handsome, charming, successful husband over the quiet, steady wisdom of the man who had raised me. The memory made me feel sick. I had been a fool, and my foolishness had cost me everything. Or it would have, if not for this dusty, forgotten place, this last act of a father's desperate love. I finally picked the letter back up, my hand steadier now. The tears had passed, leaving behind a fragile, brittle calm. I had to know the rest. I had to understand the full scope of his plan. But there is a second gift, Elena, the letter continued. And it is a harder one. It is not a gift of escape, but a gift of purpose. If you have the courage for it. This workshop is more than just a place I tinkered. For 20 years I had a secret life. By day I was a machinist for a corporation making parts for industrial pumps. But by night and on weekends I was something else. I was a restorer, a creator. My brow furrowed. A restorer of what? Furniture? Clocks. Look under the main workbench, he wrote. Not the footlocker. Farther down at the northern end. The floorboards there are different. The grain runs the wrong way. There's a recessed handle. Lift it. My heart started to pound again. I crawled on my hands and knees over to the spot he'd described. The floor was thick with a layer of sawdust and grime, but as I brushed it away, I saw it, just as he'd said. A section of the floor about 6 feet wide and 10 feet long, where the wooden planks were laid perpendicular to the others. I searched the edge and my fingers found a small, inset metal ring, flush with the wood. It was cold to the touch. I hooked my fingers through it and pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted, groaning on hidden hinges. A trapdoor. Beneath it was not a cellar, but a shallow, recessed compartment, lined with thick felt. And inside that compartment, my breath hitched in my throat. Lying there, shrouded in heavy oilcloth tarps, were the unmistakable shapes of 2 motorcycles. They were long and low, with elegant curving lines that were visible even through the covers. They weren't modern sport bikes. They looked classic, vintage. I reached down and carefully pulled back the corner of one of the tarps. The bike beneath it was a deep, lustrous black. The paint so perfect it looked like liquid night. The chrome of the engine gleamed softly in the dim light. It was a 1948 Vincent Black Shadow. I knew the name only because my father had had a poster of one in his garage, a bike he'd called the most beautiful machine ever made. I moved to the second bike and unveiled it. This one was a brilliant fire engine red.
Abreuc Superior SS100.
Another legend. These weren't just motorcycles. They were works of art. They were 2 of the most sought-after, valuable vintage motorcycles in the world. I let the tarp fall and sat back, my mind reeling. This was insane. These bikes were worth a fortune. Combined, they were worth more than the house, the savings, the entire life Mark had just stolen from me. This was not a lifeboat. This was a king's ransom. I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking. They are my masterpieces, he wrote. I found them as rusted-out husks, forgotten in barns and junkyards over decades. I spent 20 years sourcing the original parts, machining the ones that no longer exist, restoring them piece by piece to their original glory. They are almost finished. Almost. The Vincent needs its carburetors tuned and the wiring harness completed. The Broff needs its primary chain drive assembled. I ran out of time, you see. That is my great regret. So here is the second gift, Elena. It is a choice. You can take the gold, hire some people to drag these bikes out of here, sell them at auction, and you will be a wealthy woman. You will never have to worry about money again. No one would blame you. It is the logical choice, the safe choice. Or, there is the other path, the harder path. In the footlocker you found a set of books. They are not just manuals. They are my journals. 20 years of my work, my knowledge, my mistakes, and my triumphs are in those pages. Everything you need to know to finish the work is there. The tools are all here. The parts are here, cataloged and waiting. The second gift, my daughter, is not the bikes. It is the craft. It is the chance to finish what I started. To learn to build, not just to own. To create value with your own two hands, not just to have it given to you. To find a home not in a place, but in a purpose. The workshop is yours. The knowledge is yours. The choice is yours. Whatever you choose, know that I love you, and I am proud of you. Always, your loving father, Martin. I let the letter fall from my fingers. I looked at the gold coins glittering in the gloom. Then I looked at the trapdoor, at the legendary machines sleeping beneath the floor. Escape or purpose. Money or meaning. The easy way or his way. For the first time in a very, very long time, I had a real choice to make. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that I was not the same woman who had walked out of that law office this morning. Right now, I want to pause and just speak to you for a second. If you've ever felt like your life was completely derailed, like all the choices were taken from you, you know how powerful a moment like this can be. That moment when you realize you have agency again. You have a choice. It might be a hard choice, it might be terrifying, but it's yours. If this story is resonating with you, if you've ever had to find your own workshop to rebuild in, let me know in the comments below. I think we find strength in knowing we're not alone in these struggles. This community is for people who get it. Thank you for being here. Now let's get back to what I chose. I didn't choose right away. For 2 days, I lived in a strange limbo. I slept in my car, parked just down the road from the workshop, the stiff upholstery a constant reminder of my homelessness. I ate cold sandwiches and drank lukewarm water from a plastic bottle. I used the $80 to buy gas and cheap food at Oakhaven's small general store. The woman behind the counter, a kindly lady with a web of smile lines around her eyes, looked at me with open curiosity but asked no questions. In the city, I would have been invisible. Here, I was a novelty, an outsider, but I felt a strange lack of judgment in her gaze. It was just observation. During the day, I would go to the workshop. I didn't work. I just existed in the space. I read my father's letter over and over until the paper grew soft and the creases began to fray. I sat with the gold coins in my lap, feeling their cool, dense weight. I ran the numbers in my head. Selling the coins and the bikes would set me up for life. I could buy a beautiful apartment somewhere warm, travel, never work another day if I didn't want to. I could prove to Mark and to myself that I hadn't been defeated. I could win the game on my own terms. It was the sensible path. It was the path to comfort and security. But then my eyes would drift to the trapdoor. I would lift the heavy cover and just look at the two machines, their powerful forms promising something more than just monetary value. I would open my father's journals. They weren't dry technical manuals. They were filled with his thoughts, his frustrations, his moments of breakthrough. His familiar handwriting was interspersed with complex diagrams, mathematical calculations, and smudges of grease. The fuel line for the SS-100 is a nightmare. One entry read, "The original schematics are a lie. Had to remachine the connector from a solid brass block. Took 3 tries. Felt like a god when it finally seated correctly in another. Spent all day polishing the chrome on the Vincent's exhaust. Alice, my mother, would say I was crazy. But it's not just about being shiny. It's about respecting the machine. Bringing back the light it was born with. Reading his words, I felt like I was in conversation with him. He was here in this room guiding me. He wasn't just giving me a puzzle to solve. He was inviting me into his world. A world of patience, precision, and profound satisfaction. A world where value was created through skill and effort, not through market fluctuations and legal maneuvering. It was a world that was honest, solid, real. My life with Mark had been the opposite. It was a life of surfaces, of appearances, of acquiring things to project an image. We didn't build anything. We bought it. We didn't create. We consumed. On the third day, I woke up in my car as the sun was rising, casting a pale pink glow over the fields. My back ached and I was tired of being cold and adrift. I knew what I had to do. The choice had made itself. Selling the bikes would be an ending. It would be the final transaction in a life that had been defined by transactions. But finishing them, that would be a beginning. It would be an act of creation, an act of devotion, an act of becoming someone new, someone my father would be proud of, someone I could be proud of. I drove into town, used 20 of my last $60 to buy a heavy-duty bolt cutter from the hardware store, and drove back to the workshop. I snapped the old padlock on the main door. The sound of the metal giving way was the sound of my decision being made final. I slid open the huge, groaning door, and for the first time, I let the morning light flood the entire space, chasing the shadows and the ghosts into the corners. The work was about to begin. The first week was pure, backbreaking labor. The workshop had to be made livable before it could be made workable. I started by attacking the grime. I bought buckets, heavy-duty cleaners, and a stack of rags. I swept away years of accumulated dust and cobwebs, the air becoming thick with the ghosts of the past. I scrubbed the floors, revealing the oil-stained concrete and scarred wood beneath. I washed the windows, letting in more and more light, transforming the space from a gloomy tomb into a sun-drenched sanctuary. I tackled the sagging roof, using a ladder and some lumber I found stacked in a corner to prop it up from the inside. A temporary fix, but it felt like a major victory. Every evening, I would collapse into my car, my muscles screaming in protest, my hands raw, but my mind quiet. The physical exhaustion was a bomb, silencing the anxious chatter in my head. For the first time in years, I was too tired to worry. I was just doing. Once the space was clean, I turned my attention to the equipment. I spent days carefully removing the canvas tarps, cleaning each machine, and studying its function. I cross-referenced them with my father's journals. He had a section on every single piece of equipment. Its history, its quirks, how to maintain it. The lathe pulls slightly to the left on cuts deeper than 2 millimeters, he'd written. Have to compensate. Her name is Betty, he had named them. They weren't just tools to him. They were partners. I felt a growing reverence for the machines and for the man who had known them so intimately. I found the main breaker box and, holding my breath, flipped the switch. There was a low hum, and then one by one, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered to life, bathing the workshop in a steady industrial glow. It felt like I had resurrected the place from the dead. Finally, the time came to address the bikes. With a sense of ceremony, I used a block and tackle I found hanging from a ceiling beam to hoist them, one at a time, out of their hidden compartment. I placed them on hydraulic lifts in the center of the workshop, where the light was best. They were even more beautiful out in the open. They were magnificent, but they were also intimidating. They were incomplete. The Vincent's engine bay was a tangle of wires. The Brough side was open, its intricate inner workings exposed. This was the real test. Cleaning was one thing. This was another. I took the 20 gold coins, drove to a neighboring, larger town, and found a pawn shop that dealt in precious metals. I sold 5 of them. The man behind the thick glass gave me a suspicious look but paid in cash. No questions asked. The wad of bills in my pocket felt strange, both a betrayal of my father's escape plan and a necessary investment in his real legacy. With that money, I rented a small, furnished room above the diner in Oak Haven. The owner, the same woman from the general store, whose name I learned was Martha, gave me a discount when I told her I was fixing up my father's old place, having a bed to sleep in, a hot shower, a place to call a temporary home, was a luxury I would never again take for granted. The rest of the money went into the project. I bought new wiring, gaskets, fluids, and specialized tools my father's collection was missing. I spent my days in the workshop and my nights in my small room, poring over the journals, my dinner sitting forgotten beside me. The diagrams were complex, the terminology alien. I was learning a new language, the language of mechanics, of physics, of metal and fire and precision. I made mistakes. I stripped a bolt and had to learn how to drill it out. I wired a circuit backward and blew a fuse, plunging the workshop into darkness and myself into a pit of frustration. There were moments I wanted to give up, to sell the whole damn thing and walk away. In those moments, I would pick up my father's letter. The harder path, he'd called it. He knew it wouldn't be easy. His faith in me was the only thing that kept me going. Slowly, painstakingly, I started to make progress. I successfully rewired the Vincent's entire electrical system, following my father's meticulous, color-coded diagrams. The moment I connected the battery and the headlight flashed on, bright and clear, I actually shouted with joy. I learned to use the lathe, practicing on scrap metal for days before I dared to machine a tiny, custom spacer the Brof's assembly required. When it fit perfectly, I felt that same feeling my father had described in his journal. I felt like a god. I was not just assembling parts. I was breathing life into something. I was connecting with my father, finishing his sentences, completing his thoughts. The grease under my fingernails, the smell of oil on my clothes, the constant aches in my back and hands. They were no longer signs of hardship. They were badges of honor. They were proof that I was building something. Not just a motorcycle. I was building a new version of myself. Months bled into one another. The vibrant green of summer gave way to the crisp gold of autumn, and then the stark white of winter. I fell into a rhythm. Wake, work, study, sleep. My world shrank to the four walls of the workshop and the few blocks of Oakhaven's Main Street. The locals grew accustomed to the sight of me, the city girl in grease-stained overalls. They'd nod as I walked to the diner for my evening meal. Martha would always have a hot plate of whatever the special was waiting for me. An old-timer named George, who ran the hardware store, started stopping by the workshop once a week with a flask of coffee, ostensibly to see how the old place is holding up. But really, I think, just to check on me. He'd look at the bikes, whistle softly, and tell me stories about my father as a young man, a wild kid who was always tinkering with engines. "Your dad," he said one afternoon, looking at the nearly complete Brof Superior. "He didn't just fix things. He understood them. The soul of the machine, he called it. Looks like you got that from him." His words were a greater reward than any amount of money. The day the Vincent was finally finished, snow was falling thick and silent outside the workshop windows. I had spent a week tuning the carburetors, making minuscule adjustments, listening to the engine's breath. It was the last step. I had done everything according to the journals. I checked the fuel line, the spark plugs, the oil. Everything was ready. With a trembling hand, I swung my leg over the seat. The leather was cool beneath me. I turned the key. The electrics came to life. I took a deep breath and kicked the starter. The engine coughed once, twice, and then it roared to life. The sound was deafening. A deep, throaty bellow that vibrated through my entire body, through the concrete floor, shaking the very air in the workshop. It wasn't just a noise. It was a heartbeat, a powerful, thunderous, living heartbeat. I sat there, letting the engine idle, the raw power of it a living thing beneath me, and I laughed. A real, joyful, uninhibited laugh. I had done it. I couldn't ride it, not with the snow on the ground, but that didn't matter. The victory was in the roar of the engine. The Brof took another 2 months. It was a more complex machine, more temperamental. But I had my confidence now. I had the knowledge. I worked with a steady, patient focus that would have been unimaginable to the frantic, broken woman I had been a year ago. Finally, on a cool, bright day in early spring, when the last of the snow had melted and the world smelled of wet earth and new beginnings, it too was finished. The two bikes stood side by side, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The black of the Vincent and the red of the Brof. Despair and passion. My father's masterpieces. My redemption. They were perfect. And they were mine. Not because I owned them, but because I had helped create them. I knew every nut, every bolt, every wire. I knew the soul of the machines. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet reflection. The work was done. The purpose that had driven me for nearly a year was fulfilled. And a new question began to surface. What now? The original choice was still there, now more potent than ever. I could sell them. The story alone, the daughter finishing her deceased father's secret masterpieces, would make them legendary at auction. I would be wealthy beyond my wildest dreams. I could have any life I wanted. The thought, which had once been so tempting, now felt empty. What would I do with all that money? Buy a house? Fill it with things? I had done that before. It had brought me no happiness. The workshop, the work, the quiet life in Oakhaven. This had brought me a sense of peace and satisfaction I had never known. I thought about Mark. I hadn't heard from him or his lawyers since the day I left the city. To him, I had simply vanished, a problem that had been solved and forgotten. For a moment, a spiteful part of me wanted to show him, to roll up to his sterile, perfect house on one of these priceless machines, a ghost from his past he could not dismiss, to show him how utterly he had failed to destroy me. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. He didn't matter anymore. His opinion, his shock, his anger, it was all irrelevant. My life was no longer a reaction to him. It was my own. Winning wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. I made my decision. I took the remaining 15 gold coins and the tarnished silver key from the footlocker. The key, I had discovered from a note in the journals, was for a safe deposit box in a small bank in the next town over. Inside, I found my father's original ownership documents for the bikes, the deed to the workshop, and a simple, one-line note. This is your name. Defend it. I hired a local lawyer, a quiet man recommended by George from the hardware store, and used the gold to establish a legal entity. Oakhaven Restoration Works. I transferred the deed of the workshop and the ownership of the bikes into the company's name. My name. I wasn't going to sell my father's legacy. I was going to continue it. I was going to take on new projects. I was going to build a business, a life right here. The workshop wasn't just a place to hide or to rebuild. It was home. The final step was a pilgrimage. On a bright Saturday morning, I opened the big sliding door of the workshop. I wheeled out the Vincent Black Shadow, its black paint drinking in the sunlight. I put on a leather jacket and a helmet I'd bought. I swung my leg over the saddle. Felt different out here in the open air. Felt real. I turned the key, kicked the starter, and the engine thundered to life, scattering a flock of birds from a nearby tree. I eased out the clutch and the bike surged forward, moving from the gravel of the workshop lot onto the paved country road. I twisted the throttle, and the world blurred into a stream of green and blue. The wind roared in my ears, a song of pure, unadulterated freedom. I was no longer Elena, the discarded wife. I was no longer a victim. I was the woman who had brought a legend back to life. I was a builder. I was my father's daughter. And I was finally completely free. As I rode, I thought about what it means to inherit something. Before, I would have thought of money, property, things you could count and measure. But I was wrong. Mark had taken all of those things from me, and in the end, they meant nothing. My real inheritance from my father wasn't the gold or the bikes. It was the choice he gave me. It was the knowledge in his journals. It was the gift of a difficult purpose that forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. He didn't just leave me a workshop. He left me a blueprint for how to rebuild a soul. You don't inherit a home. You build one, sometimes out of wood and steel, but always out of love and purpose, and the courage to start again. What did this story teach you about what we truly inherit from the people who love us? It's often not the things they leave behind, but the strength they instill within us. The quiet lessons, the hidden sacrifices, the belief they hold in us even when we don't hold it in ourselves. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here for people who know that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. And I'd love for you to share your own story of rebuilding, of starting over, in the comments below. I promise you, I read every single one, because every story of resilience deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening.